And welcome back. Charles Moscowitz here, live on YouTube and subscribing platforms. It is an honor and it is a privilege and it is a pleasure to welcome Boston radio legend Jordan Rich. Jordan has written a memoir, which I highly recommend, On Air, My 50-Year Love Affair with Radio. It's a great insight into the business of radio and into the life of a great radio talk show host. Jordan, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Charles, I am so tickled and honored to meet you, and thank you for the opportunity. This is so much fun being on the other side of the mic for a change.
Well, it's I launched this thing, and it's amazing what someone can do now in media. It's no longer you have to get of course you have to figure out how to get paid. That's a whole different story. But you can't you no longer go to the old-fashioned radio station with the booth, and now you can reach people and develop an audience and develop a community online. And in fact, even recently, I've now started with TikTok, which my daughter was into, and I'm suddenly surging on TikTok to the point where I now can go live on TikTok, and I'm now, it's not like a talk show host in that I can take a call and do it through audio, but people text me and I could read the text and respond on the TikTok, and that's developing into a community for me. So it's a pretty amazing thing.
Well, that's exciting. Congratulations. I think that's terrific. And I was telling you right before we came on, the exciting part of the industry, I've never been more upbeat about what's going on with podcasting and live streaming and all that. It really has opened up channels, including channels for me. So good for you, Charles. Congratulations.
Now, Jordan, I want to talk a little bit about your background. You started acting in high school. You started doing broadcasting early, and then at Curry College at their small radio station. So you got with a college station, and then you went on to work in various smaller radio stations in the greater Boston area until you landed at WBZ, which is one of America's biggest radio stations. What do you think is the present condition of the good old-fashioned radio station talk show in this day and age?
Well, it's so interesting. I think about this a lot because I'm still doing it. I'm not doing a regular weekly show as I was for decades, but filling in for my colleague Dan Ray and still involved in talk and so forth. And I would say and we were just talking about platforms and how media is generated. Radio is as strong as it's ever been in terms of the listening audience, in terms of the size of the audience. It's just that people are listening through different platforms. I ask people when I talk to college age kids, how many of you have an actual radio in your house? And they scratch their heads and they don't. I mean, they don't have these either, but
right.
But they're listening to radio and to shows that are turned into podcasts from radio on their phones or whatever device they have. I would say this, that what I learned back in 1976 when I started school, what I learned back then, and the people who taught me back then, they were, I want to say, old school artists who believed in the artistry of the industry, and a lot of the essentials, the elements, the key issues that you need to have in place, including journalistic ethics, I don't think are being taught today. And I don't think, sadly, the younger millennial group and younger are coming up with all that. That's not to say that there aren't bright and exciting people on the air doing talk, but talk is a very interesting medium, as you know, Charles. I listened to, when I was a kid, a radio station that's changed hands many times, WEEI in Boston.
Yes.
When they had, and today you couldn't use this term, talk masters, people like Jim Westover and Paul Benzequin and
Steve Fredericks.
Steve Fredericks, absolutely. These were giants.
Larry King, right?
And then you go over to BZ and you've got, of course, the great Larry Glick, who was all about having fun in the late night. But people like Jerry Williams and David Brudnoy and Gene Burns. Boston's been a great cradle of talk. And I think what's happened is shortcuts. People don't want to do the heavy digging and research. You researched me, and I appreciate that going in. But that's sort of become a thing of the past. So my point is, it's still alive and well with thankfully smart and capable people, but fewer of us, I would have to say.
No, I think that there is maybe somewhat of a shift away from the live experience of the old-fashioned stick where something would be happening in the news or something would be happening in culture, and people would want to hear that immediate reaction of people off the street calling in, expressing their opinion, to something that's a little bit more canned. It's like, the podcast is pre-recorded. You can listen to it anytime you want. It's a little bit more kind of rehearsed. And I just think that the great days of the radio talk is something that I can't believe would go away. I mean, you mentioned Jerry Williams, David Broadnoy, Gene Burns. They were radio talk show hosts at a time that I think was a pinnacle of talk radio, especially in Boston. I remember on WRKO. I had the honor of bringing Jerry Williams back and getting him back on the air just before he passed away when I was at the Christian station in Quincy. And my show used to come on right after Ray Flynn. And the producer there, Jimmy Carter, happened to mention to me that he knew Jerry Williams. And I said, can you get me his number? I love Jerry. I want to talk to him. He's been off the air already for many, many years. So I called him up and I asked him if he'd come on, and then he did by phone. And then he called me back and asked me if he could get a slot on the station, which I arranged. And he came to lunch with the general manager, and he went on the air. He was in very poor health at the time, but he did the show for several months, and then sadly he passed away. But I absolutely, I have to use the word, but I idolized Jerry Williams and in the 1980s.
I had the honor of, and the joy and the fun of interviewing Jerry for a book that Alan Tolles wrote.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Alan, about Jerry Williams' career. And so it was toward the end of his life, and he was very irascible and crusty, as he always was anyway. But we would go to his house and I'd sit there and just ask questions, and he'd show me a book. Maybe he showed it to you, I'm not sure. It was a white, like a guest book you see at a wedding. And inside the book were signatures of those guests he had and collected over the years, from Malcolm X to Martin Luther King to George McGovern and Mel Torme. It's amazing. He was an enigma. And I will say this, your point about the 70s and the 60s is absolutely true. What's changed now, of course, is the fact that you've got the internet and you've got so many sources of information and so many sources of misinformation, and those great giants they're few and far between now. And then there's syndication. It's easier for a radio station to flip a switch and play a Rush Limbaugh or any one of a number of people.
Right. I mean, it's lost its localism and its immediacy, but yet at the same time, it is the purest, and Jerry would say this, the purest means of communication. It's like two guys stripped to the waist in a boxing match, duking it out, or it's like, the guy standing on a soapbox in colonial times and giving a speech. There could be nothing more pure than turning on the mic and speaking. It comes right out of your soul, right out of your mind. You cannot BS on the radio. People can feel that and they smell that. And there's a certain honesty to it that I can't believe would go away. I mean, I just think that that's something that people are going to connect to. There's something about that is so real that I just believe in it.
Well, I'm glad you're speaking my language and we're in the same plane here. And WBZ, for those who are not from the market, I know you have viewers and listeners all over the place. WBZ is even now, despite the fact that it's now owned by iHeart and has changed hands many times, still reflects a local feeling, which is rare. I mean, the fact that we still have a local talk show every night, and a few of us, and I'm one of the few, I've been there 25 years, are still doing it locally, is really an anathema to the industry. I will say this too, and you're a guy who's known the radio market pretty well, and you just mentioned working for that station a while back. There are some local stations doing amazingly good work. WCRN out in Worcester, Hank Stoltz, Rob Hackala at WATD and Ed Perry station, and now MEX 1510. So there are still local heroes, and I'm thrilled to know some of them and support them as much as I can.
Definitely. And yet I think that the radio hosts, people like yourself, they were much more intellectual. I'm not trying to put down anybody else who's on the air, but you get a guy like a David Brodnoy. I mean, he was brilliant and he was deep and he could discuss just a cross section of issues, more than a dilettante. He also had some very deep points because most radio shows hosts tend to be dilettantes. We all, know a little bit here, a little bit there. But he would go into something very deeply and he would stay in it. And I don't think that he was concerned with whether or not it was commercial, which made it commercial. I think it made it, it drew people in.
I couldn't agree with you more. I knew David pretty well as a colleague, and
Wow.
what I write about in my little memoir is the mentorship that has helped me, and I try to give back when I can. But he was a mentor, not a conscious mentor. In other words, he didn't take me aside and teach me things, but just by observing him, watching his style. And one of the things I learned was, if you're going to have an author to interview and discuss topic with, then you should be familiar with the work that you're going to be discussing. And he read voraciously. He also
Yes.
wrote voraciously. Also, I always liked, and I'm sure you have an opinion about this, but I always liked the idea of being a Renaissance person, somebody who could talk about a lot of things. As Lincoln said, you know a little bit about a lot. And
Right.
and what I found in talk radio, the way I've done it, even though I know what's going on politically and I can debate if I had to, my whole pitch was to go mainstream life, and that would be culture, art,
Hmm.
science, history. So I was able to delve into these areas, many of the kinds of things that Brudnoy would do on a regular basis. I
Right.
mean, he would sit down with some historian for 2 hours, and I was just wrapped. I was just
Yeah.
gone. And I tried to do some of that myself.
Oh, and I think you're one of the greats. I listen to you often overnight, and you just had a fantastic cross section of people. You would talk about book reviews, you would talk about movies, restaurants. I mean, it was incredible.
It was
This
fun.
is, you really got a sense. I used to get this sense from the Boston Globe. I no longer do because I think they shrank, but you would get a sense of what was going on in Boston, whether you agreed with it or not. You got a feel from what's happening in sports, what's happening in culture, what's happening in news, what's happening in opinion. And I think you brought that. I think that was a big piece for you. I mean, I really got a feeling for what, even though BZ, of course, is huge, there was a sense of what was going on in this region. And that's something that only I think a local show can do. I mean, a Rush Limbaugh really can't do that. I mean, he's
Right.
kind of a, I mean, with due respect to him, he's a bit of a party hack, um, as opposed to like taking a broad view of issues from all perspectives and bringing
Well,
in.
it's interesting you talk about this local thing that we've been harping on a bit. Uh, it always blew my mind when I would call someone to interview a local writer or something, and the person would always say, "Oh my God, I can't believe you actually took the time to call, or your producer did." And it really stems from management. When I worked there from the beginning, was all about the listeners. They all count. They all matter. And I
It's
love
the
that
lifeblood
concept.
of the program, right? That's what Jerry Williams used to say.
Exactly. Again, he also used to say he never got a dinner, but we all know
Right.
that was Jerry. But the point is, yeah, we cater to, and I still cater to the needs of the individual listeners. I mean, no one is more important than somebody in Brookline or Brockton who's got an issue that or something to promote. They're no better off or worse off than somebody in New York. I mean, that's just the way it is. And we're very parochial, as you know, Charlie. We are so parochial here in Boston. If you're
Of
from here,
course.
they accept you. If you're not, you have to work at
That's, yeah, and even if you've been here for like 20 years, I mean, it's a very
it.
Boston thing.
Exactly.
Gene Burns was one of my favorites as well. I mean, the man had such erudition and such sophistication in his use of language. I learned so much about the use of English from listening to him, that he just had this style that I don't see that too much around anymore, but it was a classic radio style. He was very rehearsed, very clipped, very prepared, and yet, very connected to his listenership.
Couldn't agree more. And as a fan of language and what is left of the English language, I was always, as you were, an admirer of how he used words and phrases to make a point. And I'm old enough to remember, and it's still around, the Reader's Digest little column on new words, dictionary words, adding to your vocabulary. Well, I would add to my vocabulary with Brudnoy and Gene Burns,
Oh
two
yeah.
intellectuals. And also you said something again that I want to just highlight, and that's being prepared and doing the homework. When we're on the air, you, me, or anyone who's doing this, there's an awesome responsibility because we're not just talking to one or two or 50, we're talking to perhaps hundreds of thousands of people. And I guarantee there are people out there who know a hell of a lot more about certain issues than I will ever know. But
Mm.
it's my job and our job to at least be prepared with the basics to understand references. When I teach, and I teach occasionally, I always tell the younger students, I say, the most important thing you're going to have to learn is how to be a reference man. And they say, well, what do you mean by that? I said, you need to know why the Civil War was fought and when. You need to know the history of, if you're talking sports, you should know what the Negro Leagues were and why. So, I mean, I don't think, I think I'm a generalist and I love that. And I love learning. So no one's perfect. No one will ever know it all. But those guys, those real pros, instilled in me that desire to be professional and to know as much as I can. If I don't know it, I admit it. I say, I don't know anything about this, so let's research it.
Well, Jordan, what was your usual process of prep when you would do a show? Because you always came across it, you would make something that's very difficult sound easy, which is a classic skill. And so, but yet I know a lot of prep went into it. So what was your usual methodology?
Well, as I've said many times, I was not a student in school who loved homework. I didn't really enjoy doing homework. I grudgingly did. When I got into the radio world, I loved, all of a sudden fell in love with homework. And basically, unlike a lot of shows that you hear on the air, they, in the BZ show, which I did for 25 years, they gave me carte blanche to do whatever I wanted topic wise. Was never any discussion about don't say this, don't talk
Hmm.
about it. And I opted to go for a format that I thought about for a while. The Tonight Show, the Late Shows, all the TV shows where you'd have Don Rickles on for the first segment, then you'd have a trainer of animals for the second segment and a singer on the third. Well, the same kind of thing. I wanted to make it a smorgasbord because people are not going to listen all night long. They're going to fall asleep and come in and out. But here's the thing. I asked not, I didn't ask not, I turned down the offer to have a producer, someone booking the show,
Hmm.
because even though it was a bit more work, it was so much easier for me to know on Saturday night I have A, B, C, and D, which gives me the whole week to prepare. And I line them up. I know who's coming up, cut out the middleman. So I don't know. I don't think it's anything magical or formulaic. I think I just loved reading and reading books. I champion the fact that I did so many authors, hundreds, maybe thousands. And I developed my own skill set when it came to reading quickly.
Hmm.
Nonfiction, piece of cake.
Right.
Fiction, not so easy. You have to really read the book if you want to talk with a fiction writer.
Right. Plus, with
So,
fiction, you have to really think through the concepts, and with nonfiction, it's a little bit more straightforward. Although I think that with politics included, you have to have a general understanding of what went on, and you have to have something to add to it, something unique that you can contribute in terms of thought, and that's not so easy.
well, Charles, I'll say this life experience. If you grew up, we're probably close in age in the same generation.
Yeah.
I mean, I was born in 1958. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. So my life experience, I lived through I mean, I was very young. I lived through the Kennedy assassination. I
Hmm.
lived through the 60s, Vietnam. I lived through Watergate. I lived through all of that. And I think that was a good time to grow up, to be in the business I'm in, because there's a great frame of reference. And I'm thinking what bugs me today is anybody in conversation who says, it happened before I was born. I don't really care. Or if it's a black and white movie, it doesn't count.
I know they'll say, like, when did this happen? As if somehow it's not relevant unless it happened yesterday.
And for most people, it really doesn't matter if you're not planning to be a talk show host or be a librarian, but I think it enhances your life. And my life has been enhanced by, experiencing things, interviewing all kinds of celebrities and nons, and keeping my ears open, pretty
Yeah, I
much.
mean, it's important to understand and integrate. It's like what the sociologist C. Wright Mills talked about, the sociological imagination. You have to have both a kaleidoscopic view of the past and how it relates to the present, and a kaleidoscopic view of your own personal life and what's going on inside, and then how that relates to society. And you develop this kind of. I think most talk show hosts have this who get into issues. They have a degree of that. I think that talk radio also became somewhat more coarsened, and I think Rush Limbaugh contributed to that. Even though I admire Rush Limbaugh, I think he added a certain level of nastiness. And Jay Severin, who I thought was a brilliant thinker and one of the best radio talk show hosts, and yet he always made me cringe, and I always found it very disappointing because he had this nasty side, and he didn't need to do that because he was talented, but yet he would resort to it often, and I think it was a great discredit to not just him, but to the whole industry.
I know he's passed on, and we certainly
Yes.
miss him. I agree, a fine talent, and I think of a lot of people. We are people first and foremost, and we bring with us our own background, personality, makeup, etc. And I think in some cases that separation of your personal issues with what you're doing professionally as a performer, they
Mm,
meld. In other cases, people are able to separate them. Um, this is a business where hubris and ego can kill you. And just the industry is
right.
littered with people, as you know, who have burned out, super talents who have burned out because they're just nasty to the audience, and
Hmm.
worse, they're nasty to their colleagues and untrustworthy, etc. But these are character issues. What I learned, and I write about this in my book, is at an early age was you treat the people you work with first and foremost respectfully because they're just as important to the team. But then when it comes to listeners, uh, there's always a need to be stern. You have to hold to your point of view, and you have to control the room. You can't allow mutinies, and you can't allow uh, folks to just go crazy anarchistically on the air. But I always relied on, again, on mentors, Norm Nathan, uh, David, and there's a way to do it. I found a way to be polite, courteous, respectful, and still make the point. And in some
Hmm.
cases, people used to say, "Why did you leave that guy on who was ranting and raving, and anti-Semitic, anti this, anti that?" I said, "Well, uh, one main reason I wanted the world to hear him and the sunshine, so called, to expose this person and then get other people to react, and it never failed." So I agree, coarseness, and how many times have we heard, "Oh, we need to return to civility"? I mean, we hear that every day from some other politician. It's a shame. It's a culture-wide phenomenon where people have just decided, I'm usually anonymous when I'm online on
Hmm.
Twitter. I'll just zap somebody and run away. It's a shame. I think the civility that we all yearn for, it would be worth fighting for. I really do.
Definitely. And I mean, I think another good example of that as a talk show host is Larry King, who he'd be criticized for like tossing soft grapefruits at his guests. And he'd have some horrible people on, but they were people who had influence. So we want to find out what makes them tick, because they do have influence. But yet he would get them to reveal more by kind of making things seem comfortable. He bring them into a comfort zone and get them to open up than he would if he went in with his fist swinging. I mean, then you just have nothing but a bunch of shouting matches and you wouldn't learn anything.
I agree. One of my favorite people in the world is Dick Cavett, and I had the chance
Oh
to
yeah.
meet him and interview him several times.
Wow.
And there's an example of, I think what we're talking about too is a style. The style that I've always tried to go with is the conversational style. Like as we're having this conversation, you and me. Now, if we were debating each other and I was talking over you and you were talking over me, it's not a very pleasant thing for listeners. I mean, it used to be fun when Jerry Williams did it and had fun with them, but those days are long gone. I just think in an era where everyone wants to be heard and talk up louder than the other person, when you settle back and do what we're doing, it's almost like people go crazy over how wonderful it is. Ultimately, I'm not talking about just us, but
Understood.
the idea of allowing someone to get their point across, even if it's a bizarre point, and then responding. It's just, I think, a better overall way to proceed. And it worked for me. So I
It
can't
it
complain.
does. And we're trusting the listener to make a discernment as you kind of get to certain truths. I mean, another master at this is Howard Stern. Even
Yes.
though I don't endorse some of his things, he would bring someone in and he would ingratiate himself and he'd make them comfortable to the point where they would reveal the most personal things. It was almost like listening to an obscene phone call, right? I mean, it's like eavesdropping. There's something really delicious about that. We're hearing somebody talk about their intimate life, and they did it because he would kind of disarm them. I mean, he wouldn't,
Yeah.
it's almost like he wasn't even in the room. He would just kind of move a little bit here and a little there, and before you know it, they're spilling the beans. So, yeah.
No, you're right. I feel the same way about some of the content I'm not crazy about and the way he goes about it. But the way he interviews people and has a conversation is very, very effective. And it's, everyone's unique and has their own style. When I had the pleasure of talking with, say, a major star in a film or something, or a TV series, the first thing I think about is, oh my God, this poor person has probably had 50 interviews. And that's the way they run these things, cattle calls.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, what can I discuss with this individual that is off the subject that he or she might be interested in, just to give him or her a break? And that usually worked. I'd find some little inside edge to bring up, and that really developed a good rapport. But yeah, it's I'll throw out a couple of other names from the past. And I know he's scandal ridden and he's gone now, but Charlie Rose was that kind of
Oh
guy
yeah,
who
excellent
could
interview.
lean in and get the
Oh
people
yeah,
to
with
talk.
the oak
He was,
table, you bet.
oh yeah, with the
I
oak
never
table.
missed it. Yeah.
Anna Cavett and David Susskind way back in the early days. These are the folks who really impressed me. Even Johnny Carson. I mean, Johnny
Oh,
Carson was
brilliant.
brilliant at getting people to open up and respond and be funny and all that. So
He
really
was.
cool.
Now, I've noticed, and maybe you might concur, maybe not, but I think that things have become a little bit more divisive in recent decades. In that, when I started getting a little involved in radio, I went to I was driving for a living and I was listening to a lot of radio and I fell in love with it. And so I went to Tufts University and asked them if they would give me a radio slot, which they did. And yeah, I'm conservative. People there are mostly liberal, and the door would open. A young woman with purple hair and tattoos would open the door, and here I am, with my button-down shirt, and I'm older, and yet people were very tolerant, and they'd come on the air with me, and we'd have great debates and ruckus conversations. I had Noam Chomsky on for a whole series. Howard Zinn I had on.
Mm.
I had Barney Frank on, and we debated to the point where I became so interested that I actually ran against him for Congress.
Oh,
Um, and it was a great time, and we didn't agree, but we all had fun, and sometimes things got a little heated, but for the most part, it was just an amazing dialogue. Now you can't do that. I went back to Tufts recently, like 2, 3 years ago, to try it again, like 10 years, 15 years later. And nobody would talk to me. Noam
mm.
Chomsky won't come on with me, even though not personally, but just he won't talk to people who don't agree. They all know I'm conservative and they don't want to talk to a conservative. And I think there's been such a divide now between left and right that, you cannot get that to happen now. It's almost like two alternative universes. And there's something really disturbing about that because we're missing the bigger picture.
Well, you're bringing up a subject that affects, I think, all of us in the performance industry. We're talking about a series of woke, WOKE, woke
Yes.
issues that have really become inane and insane. I have always been a fan of free speech and allowing people to talk,
Right.
even those who totally disagree with the mainstream. Um, I have a lot of friends in the world of stand-up comedy, I mean, from Boston and beyond, and they're the last bastion of courageous, some of them,
Mm.
of courageous truth tellers. And they are on the chopping block, as are so many. I'm sure you're familiar with Ben Shapiro,
Yeah,
the conservative
sure.
talk show host.
Yeah.
I interviewed him when he was 17.
He's a
And
Harvard student at the time, right?
yeah, and he's whether you agree with him or not doesn't matter. He's an amazing,
Right.
but he has a
Very
funny
good mind.
he has a funny expression. He says when it's his birthday, all of the liberal people that he's known will wish him privately a happy birthday, right? Step underneath the radar, private message. But God forbid that they should publicly do it or they would be excoriated.
Oh, yeah.
Um, I think, I think it's going to burn itself out eventually because people are getting fed up with the idea that college campuses are not open spaces for ideas as they should be.
That's
I
what the
mean,
whole
Tufts of
purpose
all
of it.
places.
Yeah. I know, you'd
So,
think.
and I also think what forget about the take you have or I have or it doesn't matter. This medium, this YouTube streaming podcast medium, is finally going to challenge mainstream media, which is exceedingly biased in one
Hmm.
direction. And I
Yes.
think that's the hope for the future, that there are alternate voices and people are, I mean, the polls indicate that people's respect and understanding and faith in media is down about where they have it in Congress, like 5%.
Right.
So it's there's a backlash, and I think it's timely. I think there should be.
No, I think there is. And I think that the whole phenomena of the YouTube channel, and I do this I have it on Rumble and Minds and all these other venues. So it's more diversified. It's growing. I mean, I have people who come on my show who have like a 500,000 followers now. And it's really something that I think is stepping into a vacuum of, kind of certain set thinking. And I would suggest somewhat censorious thinking. And it's bringing things back to where it should be, which is a balance of opinion, a diversity
Exactly.
of opinion.
I mean, that's always been the way I've tried to run my broadcasts to allow, because quite frankly, it's pretty boring when it's the same point of view over and over again.
Yeah.
And institutionally, people always talk about the radio formatted talk radio. Well, that's where all the conservatives are. And people used to ask me, and I'm a conservative thinker in the traditional sense. I mean, I don't have a party affiliation, but
Right.
I believe in the rule of law. I believe in fairness and all that. But people would say to me, "Boy, it's all right wing on the talk radio side." And I said, the management of the radio station doesn't care whether you're right, left, middle. They care about ratings and
Right.
making money. And it just so happens that the audience discovered talk radio is there. That audience was very loyal and is very loyal, and that's why it
Yeah.
works.
I mean, they put a monkey on if they thought they could sell ads.
Absolutely.
So, all right. My guest is Jordan Rich, and the book is On Air, My 50-Year Love Affair with Radio. Jordan, one of the things that I picked up from your book, and I think it's maybe one of the aspects, the secret sauce of your success, is besides having an incredible personality on the air, is that you are very well versed in the business of radio. You understand production, you understand engineering, you have a good partnership with Ken Carberry, and he has the business thing as well. You're in business. You really have a very broad skill set that supports the talk part. And I think that that's not only a secret to survival in the business, but it also, you bring that to your talk because you have these broad experiences that connect with people.
I agree. It's been a lifesaver career-wise for me when I started out. The concept of staying in one place in a broadcast career in radio is is not very popular. The idea is you move around, you go to Ohio, you go to California, you go to Florida, you go wherever the work is. Well, the work was always on air, and I've been on air various places, but because I anchored myself here in Boston with production. Now, what is production? For those who don't know, it's voiceover, it's crafting, it's editing, and I absolutely love that part of the business. I can't get enough of it. And if you're lucky enough to meet up with and connect with a partner in this case, who's also number one friend, and you trust him, and vice versa, and we build this thing together. We're not millionaires by any stretch, Charles, as you can imagine, but we've had a blast doing it for all these years.
You've done pretty well.
And you're right. Understanding that the broadcasting world, and quite frankly, the podcasting world, is still a business model that can work. And why does it work? Because you have to get the customers, in this case, the listeners. Then in turn, you have to get the advertisers ultimately. And I've always played on both ends in terms of the background and the foreground. And when I say love affair, I love so many aspects of the business. I love sitting around with guys who've done morning shows, and I did a morning show for decades, just talking about sleep or lack thereof, or talking with engineers about towers. I'm not an expert, but there are some funny stories about, I know, sounds silly, funny stories about antenna and towers, and whatever it might be. The industry is fascinating, and if somebody ended up working with Paul Harvey for a day, I want to talk to that person.
Oh, wow. Yeah. No, I mean, I've heard radio talk being described as a disease. It's like you're in it, and it becomes so much a part of you that you it's a life mission. You can't let go of it.
It's very, very contagious. Yeah.
Jordan Rich, I want to thank you for joining me. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Well, Charles, I am really excited to get to know you. I'm going to be following your work now. I apologize. No, I mean, I apologize if I hadn't prior, but there's new vistas opening up all the time. And I just want to add before we close that, and you probably mentioned this at some point anyway, but I put this little book together. It's self-published, and I'm handing all royalties, because as you know, the publisher, Amazon, gets their cut. But all of my royalties are being donated to Boston Children's Hospital. Wonderful. I didn't write this to make money. I didn't have any thought of that.
No, it's a very helpful book. It's a great insight into the radio business. It's a great insight into the life of a radio man, both the ups and the downs. And it's I just find it to be very inspiring, and I highly recommend it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I wish you and your listeners and viewers a wonderful new and happy and safe